All right, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me now? That's an old joke, but good evening. Thank you all so much for being here with us on the second night of Unmasking Hampton Roads at Tidewater Community College in Portsmouth. We are so glad that many of you came back after our program last week. Thank you for your time and for coming to hear from different perspectives in our community. I'm Samantha Willis. I'm a writer, a journalist, and co-creator of the Unmasking series and of Unmasking Hampton Roads. And I'm joined by Ms. Vivian Oden, who is the Vice President for Special Projects at the Hampton Roads Community Foundation. Just briefly want to tell you what this is all about. Unmasking Hampton Roads is the third unmasking series in the state of Virginia. The first two the first one was in Richmond in 2016. The second one was in Charlottesville in 2018. And now we've come to Hampton Roads to discuss the historic impact of racism in this region. So unmasking, it sounds kind of uncomfortable, and that's with intention that we've named it that. The series is based off of, or inspired by, I should say, the poem We Wear the Mask by African-American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. And it talks about hiding our real identities and our real feelings behind a mask. So the goal of this series is to remove that mask, to get real about these issues that are often hard to talk about: race, racism, identity, discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. So we are glad to see that everyone here, you've really shown us that you're ready to have courageous conversations. Last week you showed us by participating in our kickoff with a play and with the small group discussions led by so many incredible students from Norfolk State, from here at TCC, from ODU, from other places, from faith groups. And you're here again tonight, which encourages us and tells us that this region is ready for this type of dialogue. So I also want to just briefly, before we begin, remind everyone, please turn your cell phones down. I'm not going to say turn them off, because I know that's, highly unlikely. But please turn them down so that it's on silent and we don't interrupt the dialogue that our panelists are going to bring forward in a few moments. Also, Unmasking is a partnership, but it's presented in partnership with the Hampton Roads Community Foundation and also Virginia Humanities. You can go to our website, www.unmaskinghr.org, to learn more about both of those organizations and our partnership. And this Unmasking series is just the second part in a multi-year initiative called Beneath the Surface. We'll be starting our next portion of that program, which is a grant funding cycle, next year. So please go to the website, stay tuned for what we're going to be doing in the future. I'm going to turn it over to Vivian now, and again, thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Samantha. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. So I'm excited and honored to introduce our moderator for the evening, award-winning journalist Anita Blanton. Anita joined the WAVY TV 10 WBBT Fox 43 family from KOCO TV in Oklahoma City, where she served as morning anchor for 4 years. She anchors WAVY News at 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 11 p.m., and as well as WAVY News 10 at 10 p.m. on Fox 43. She began her journalism career as a reporter at KTXS TV in Abilene, Texas, before heading to Central Texas to work at KWTX TV in Waco and WRIC TV in Richmond, Virginia. A lot of letters. Anita is a proud alumna of Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, and former Miss Hampton University. She earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Broadcast Journalism and Political Science from Scripps Howard School of Journalism and Communications. And she was named to the inaugural Top 40 Under 40 class of alumni. Anita is a member of the National Association of Black Journalists and my soror, member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Without further ado, I present to you our moderator for the evening, Anita Blanton.
All right, everybody. So I'm really excited to be here. Once again, we had a great conversation in Virginia Beach in October, and now we've moved on over to Portsmouth and yet another great crowd here. It's nice just to look at the crowd and already to see the diversity. And one of the things that we saw last month when we had our conversation with our panelists was you could have one topic with 4 people from different perspectives, and they all had a different way of seeing it. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Today we're not here to erase anyone's perspective. It's just to bring it all to the table so we can talk through it together and you can kind of see where people are coming from with the ideas that they have. Because we do have our Vice Mayor here, I want to recognize Vice Mayor of Portsmouth, Lisa Lucas-Burke, and any other elected officials who are here. And let's begin. Are you ready? Okay, all right. So let me introduce you to our panelists, and then once we get them on the stage, we're going to start with these questions. The great thing about my being here tonight as your moderator, I have a taping to do at 9:30 over at WAVY TV, so we're not going to belabor too long, okay? All right, so I'll begin with our first panelist this evening, and that's James Boyd, the president of the Portsmouth NAACP, and as I call them up, they can go ahead and come up to the stage and be seated. James Boyd was sworn in as the 32nd president of the Portsmouth branch of the NAACP on December 8, 2014. So he's coming up on an anniversary. Mr. Boyd is the youngest person to hold this position and is the second youngest NAACP branch president across the nation. Mr. Boyd has been a servant leader with the NAACP for several years of his life. From 2012 to 2014, he served as the chairperson of Housing and Political Action for the Portsmouth NAACP, leading and overseeing several outreach programs targeting racial disparities and public housing throughout the city of Portsmouth. And he's done so many other things. We're going to hear more from him tonight. Again, give it up for James Boyd. Mary Hill, Executive Director, Suffolk African American Cultural Society. She's a native of the historic Hobson Village. It's located in the northern end of the city of Suffolk. Hobson Village, if you don't know, it's one of the few freestanding African American communities that can trace its history back to the mid-1700s. Mary is the daughter and full-time caregiver since 1999 of 98-year-old Mary Hill and the late Ernest Hill Jr. She is one of 9 children and attended John Yates High School and the Virginia Commonwealth University with a concentration in physical therapy and sign language. Again, let's give it up to Mary Hill. Randy Williams is the owner of Talley Twine. The president of the company, he designs and manufactures luxury watches and accessories. Since starting the company in 2014, Randy has gained national media attention with features in Essence, Ebony, Black Enterprise, and the Huffington Post. The Camilla, Georgia native and a graduate of Albany State University, has a passion for serving the community, and Talley Twine recently received the COVA Biz Community Impact Award. So let's hear it for Randy Williams. Chief Kelvin Wright, Chesapeake Chief of Police. He commands a growing department with over 525 police officers and civilian personnel. Chief Wright was born and raised in the city of Portsmouth, Virginia. He joined the Chesapeake Police Department in 1982 as a patrolman and has earned several promotions through the years, as you can tell. Kelvin Wright was appointed to the position of Chief of Police with the rank of Colonel on April 1st, 2008. Shortly after being appointed Chief of Police, Chief Wright created and implemented a department-wide crime reduction strategy that has significantly reduced both property crimes and crimes against the person in the city of Chesapeake, which has always been associated with one of the safest cities in the nation. Here for Chief Kelvin Wright. Dr. Allan Bergano, co-founder of the Hampton Roads Chapter of the Filipino American National Historical Society, born and raised in Seattle, Washington. Dr. Bergano is a product of two community activist programs, that's busing and affirmative action. As a result, he became the first Filipino American to graduate from the School of Dentistry, the University of Washington in 1981. He became the first Filipino American to practice dentistry in the state of Virginia when he opened his private practice in Virginia Beach. That was in November of 1983, and he co-founded the Hampton Roads Chapter of the Filipino American National Historical Society, the organization that became the foundation for hundreds of high school and college students on the East Coast, helping them discover who they are and what they can become. Dr. Bergano. And we have one guest host here today who has joined us at the very last minute. And so I'm going to ask, we can go back up to the stage together, because I'm going to hand the mic over to him so he can introduce himself. But you all probably have heard his voice, maybe seen him around town. I'm talking about Bob Matthews, the host of the Bob Matthews Show on WTAR.
This is what we call ad-libbing. Thank you. If any of you have lived here for a long time, you might remember me with hair when I worked at Channel 3 as a reporter, as a sports anchor, as pretty much a jack of all trades in the newsroom there. For the last 10 years, like almost 10 years, I've been working in Sinclair Communications at both WNIS and WTAR, where I have my own show now in the afternoon. And thank you so much for having me here tonight. And hopefully I can lend something to the discussion. All yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, I believe this mic might be yours. Let's see. I think there might be another one. All right. Okay. So now that we've introduced everyone, let's get to the questions. That's the good stuff, the fun stuff. I have some prepared questions for our panelists today, and then we're going to take some questions from many of you and those who have been chiming in online as well. You know, it's almost 2020, so we got to make sure everything's online too. Okay, so recently local media reported, just got finished talking about it, reported on elevated lead levels of drinking water at more than 24 schools in Virginia Beach. The historic African American community of Hobson and Suffolk, so we know we're going to Mary Hill here, it has long had unclean drinking water and some issues with that. So how have these types of environmental issues impacted communities of color in the region? And we want to be solution oriented tonight. So what do you think some of the solutions are that are available?
There have been challenges. There have been challenges with the water in Hobson. However, as a historical African American village, people today say community, we consider ourselves family. And it's our hope that as a family, we will address these issues head on. Solutions will be offered that will not put anyone in financial stress or ultimately affect their health. We believe that water is a human right. So the right to safe drinking water is for every community as a human right.
Absolutely. And what do you think some of those conversations, you know, family has to have some deep conversations sometimes. So how do you have a conversation about something like that? You know, we look at instances like a Flint, and even when we look at what's taking place in Virginia Beach right now, you know, initially the school district came out with the information, made it public. You know, there's some issues as to did they take too long to make it public, but once they did make it public, then you start to have politicians who have their opinion on what you've done. How do you have the conversation? And do you think it's going in the right direction?
Well, we've had conversations in an open dialogue with the city of Suffolk as well as EPA. From our village, we grew up on a deep well because the freed men devised their own aqueduct system to serve the homes with water. because they didn't want to pay rent for water. That's what helped make us self-sufficient and independent. But as you know, time change and there are state regulations in terms of drinking water. We have a Hobson Artesian Well Association that was devised in 1947. So, but we were treated as a waterworks, like a municipality. So we did our samples, and the only issue major that we had was fluoride. That it was within a small variance, but it was still above the state standard. And so with that, in collaboration with the city and with organizations such as the Southeast Rural Community Development out of Roanoke, many of the residents now have connected to the city water system.
And so some of the questions that I'm asking, they're going to be a little pointed to one person, but any of our panelists can jump in at any point in time if you have something to say on the particular topic. How do you define equity as it pertains to the Portsmouth area, Chesapeake, Suffolk communities, and the Hampton Roads region as a whole? And before you answer, I want to point us back to when we were in Virginia Beach, a conversation we had about equality and equity, and I just loved one of the examples that was raised, and that was that equality is when we all get a pair of shoes. Equity is when we each get a pair of shoes that fits. I love that, and I'm going to remember it for the rest of my life. So now, anybody who wants to jump in there, please feel free.
I think we got to kind of redefine a little bit what Anita was talking about in terms of equity and equality. I think we got to go to the basis of what racism is. And sometimes we get it confused with prejudice and bigotry. So racism is when one group of people hold a disproportionate share of wealth, power, and resources, and then use those three things to marginalize, discriminate, and ultimately eliminate a weaker group of people. That in and of itself is racism. And we got to really define, because sometimes we kind of get it confused, because the racist might say, hey, I'm not racist because I'm not the bigot. You see what I mean? We have to really define what racism is if we're going to really unmask and have a uncomfortable conversation, because if we're going to get to solutions, we got to get uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable to take off a mask. We all know, even if you go to some of the superheroes, Batman is uncomfortable taking off his mask. Why? Because it shows you Bruce Wayne, and it doesn't show you Batman. So we got to learn how to, one, demask it, learn what racism is, that you don't have to be a bigot to be a racist. If you control wealth, power, and resources that traditionally in America has been with white citizens, then we have to really address that, take off the mask and say, one, how do I want to acknowledge it? When you have an issue, if you're alcoholic or if you have a drug addiction, the first step is what? Admittance. So we got to, one, admit it. We got to admit it, and then we can get to solutions. So I wanted to start it off by saying, and on that question, is in terms of equity and equality. First, with wealth, power, and resources. Talking about wealth first, and I know we're going to get into the conversation later about wealth, because there's a huge disparity in Hampton Roads with wealth. So I just wanted to make that underline, if that's okay, Anita, to set that foundation for us to think about what racism really is in America. And in terms of having let's then talk about equity.
Good pivot there. And it's good to look at the layers. And there are layers that we have to kind of peel back in order to have a good conversation about it. Anyone else want to talk about equality and equity? All right, we're going to come back to it, you know. But we'll start there with what Mr. Boyd has said so far. Chief Wright and James, this is going to be more so directed toward you. Portsmouth garnered national attention earlier this year when its former chief of police alleged a culture of racism within the police department. So how can police departments in the region examine and address these types of concerns, and how can citizens and police work together to reduce racial discord in our communities and make them safer spaces for everyone?
Thank you, Anita, for the question. Good evening, everyone. I think that first and foremost, when you talk about demasking or unmasking and having that dialogue, I think that you cannot have that dialogue without first examining oneself. People need to ask themselves, what is my role and responsibility with regard to how I interact with my fellow man, my fellow woman, regardless of their sexual orientation, their color, what have you. And I think that people need to be honest with themselves and then have that conversation with another human being. I think that what we try to do, and I'm going to say we, I don't want to necessarily include just my department. I do have a lot of contact with other chiefs, not just here in this area, but across the state and indeed across the country. I think that people, because of the exposure of the things that have taken place across this country, I think that some of the things that we have seen in the media with regard to young black males and young black females being treated in the manner in which they have been treated, it is causing us to stand up and take note. And I often say to my peers, you cannot defend wrong. You see something that is wrong, you have an obligation, because we are sworn to protect the public. And the public is what? The people, regardless of what they look like. We cannot continue to sit idly by and not hold people accountable, our own people accountable, and just say, well, you know, that's the way things are in the job. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a pitiful excuse. And it does not serve the people that we serve well, nor does it serve my beloved profession. Like I said, you can't defend wrong. And I think we need to have that real conversation, say, you know what, this person acted out of, I don't know what they acted out of, but what they did is wrong. And just simply call it for what it is. And I think that we have to be accessible as leaders. We have to be accessible to our communities. You cannot sit in your office and not have contact with the public. I met a gentleman here tonight. He says, hey, Chief Wright, didn't I just see you last Saturday at another forum? Well, you know, and I told him, I said, I have a hard time saying no. Not just because someone asked me, but I feel that it's my obligation, my duty as a person of color and as a chief of police to be involved and be engaged in these types of forums and any others, to give my perspective and give my voice. And I don't want to take a lot of people's time, and I hope I'm answering your question. But literally, ladies and gentlemen, if in fact I remain silent, the work that I've done means nothing if I remain silent. And I think that it's important that the work that I've done, or the work that I'm trying to do, and the work that I see other people trying to do, such as Mr. Boyd, Mary, and so forth, all of us are trying to do, and ladies and gentlemen, it has an impact. It may not be immediate that you see the results of your work, but you will see the results over time. You will see someone's life that you impacted for the better. And that is my goal, and I think that that is the goal of a lot of professionals. And I think that, again, we need to be open and transparent and be accessible to the people.
And we really appreciate you coming out to be a part of this. Again, I'm juxtaposing things tonight with Virginia Beach. When we were in Virginia Beach, the chief of police from Norfolk came out. So I think we have to, acknowledge wrong when it takes place, but also acknowledge the right. And that's you being out in the community. We often see the chief from Newport News, who's out in the community a lot as well. So we have a lot of great police chiefs who are here in this area, and we appreciate you coming out to answer the questions, answer the call. Yeah. And James, did you want to address that as well?
Yeah, real quick, and I agree, Chief, and I appreciate your honesty and being open, because that is the first step. But the challenge that Anita brought up, Chief Chapman, the challenge that we found was it's not just the chief being open and willing, it's those underneath the chief, the sergeants who are on the streets and the lieutenants who are on the street. Because real quick to tell you what happened with Chief Chapman, there is a element inside of the police department. Anytime that you have a police chief come out and say that she is the chief of the most racist department she's ever been in, that is eye-opening. And even those in CNN that came to Portsmouth said, we've never seen a chief come out and say, I am in the most racist department that I've ever experienced. And she was the first and only black female police chief in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And how she came and how there was an element that came against her. And let me tell you about Portsmouth. We still today have there's no black captains in the police department right now, in the Portsmouth Police Department. There hasn't been. She was the first when she came here. She was the first African American above the rank of captain. And so she came in, she brought in diversity. She started bringing in programs, body cam policies, and things to open up. We had candid conversations about officers who needed to be off the force because they were not living up to the standard that Chief Wright just mentioned. And so we had these conversations, and anytime you interrupt the order, that element is going to come around and get you. And that's exactly what happened with the chief. And we have to be honest and open about that and say, one, how can that exist in a department that's supposed to protect and serve? And so many times in this country, we see this element inside the police departments, inside of the Fraternal Order of Police, the unions, and we're going to be honest about it, that we have to really be open with it. But what happened was there was a racist element that came in and took her out of her place as chief. And then even went further when she went to get another job, we even followed her there because we had to go to Maryland and try to defend her there. But she still didn't get the job. So now her reputation is so diminished that she may not be able to get a chief job again. That is a racist element that came in that's still following her. We got to be open and honest with it. But it starts with conversations. It starts with conversations of us to say, let's get to the lieutenant and sergeant ranks, have a real conversation, be real in the community, and I'll be, Chief, you've had a candid conversation about some encounters in Chesapeake that are concerning. But the good thing is you're open to have the conversation. And that is not the willingness of a lot of police chiefs in this area. So I appreciate it, and we got to keep having the real conversations.
Absolutely. Starts with the conversation, and then hopefully we get to, some change. It's not to say that everything's going to go right, but it is to say that that's the start of change. Did you want to say something, Chief Wright?
Yes. And I think that Mr. Boyd said something that's important. Is having that dialogue, and you said it as well. I'll reiterate. You might not see change right away, but you have to stay at it. It's the title of a movie, The Constant Gardener. You have to constantly pull weeds. Honestly, as a police chief, and I suspect it's not just in law enforcement, it's in whatever profession any of us are in, you constantly have to pull weeds. Because they're human beings, somebody that works for you is not doing it the way it should be done, the way that it is defined. They're letting their personal biases affect the manner in which they deliver services to our customers. And yes, we try to retrain people. We try to make people aware. James, I gotta tell you, I went to something at the TCC campus in Norfolk about 2 years ago, and it was one of the most amazing programs I've ever attended. I can't remember who it was put on by, but it was some people out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and it talked about the history of racism in the world. And I told you people after it was over with, and I've had cultural diversity and all kinds of other training. I said, we got it wrong. We need to get this training before we get everything else. And I said, I don't say me, I said we need to get this for our people so they understand how is it that things change over time, and it seems that one person or one set of group of people is more desirable, more appealing than the others. And then you see how things can get out of whack, and then how to change things. I was amazed at how here we live right here in Hampton Roads, and we're not that far from the place where the rebellion took place. And Nat Tanner's, thank you. And as she's telling us this, she's from North Carolina. I said, look, hey, I grew up here in Virginia. I know all about this. But I was amazed at how many Virginians did not know that literally about 70 miles away is where Nat Turner's rebellion took place, and they had no idea about the history of Southampton County and Virginia. So for me, I think that it's important that we, as leaders in everything, whatever industry we are in, that we be the constant gardener to try to encourage our people to understand they have biases and that they affect the way they view people and how they interact with people. And they need to be aware of them, and they need to take affirmative steps to change their behavior. And for me, as Chief of Police, I give you the opportunity, but and we will try to retrain you. But again, sometimes I have to pull weeds. And I'm not calling people weeds, I'm just saying, you don't fit here. You are not acting in the best interest of the people that we serve.
I was at Hampton University earlier today, and I was speaking to the students there, and we talked about, the growth that comes from uncomfortable places. That you have to get out of comfort zones in order to see that growth on the other end. So, sometimes things have to get a little uncomfortable. So, how have you seen racism? This is for any of the panelists. How have you seen racism or other types of discrimination manifest in today's Hampton Roads community? And how can you confront it? We don't want to act like it doesn't happen. We get it. Yes, it's 2020, almost 2020, and we've come a long ways. But we can't act like it doesn't happen or doesn't exist. So how do you see it, and how do you address it? How do you confront it when you see it? I think Dr. Bergano wants to speak as well.
Thank you. Yes, I'm not from the area, but on November 17th, I just celebrated my 36th anniversary of setting up my dental practice here. So I've been here for 36 years. Racism is very, well, when I talk to a lot of my students, they have to be aware that racism is alive. And I'm 66 years old, and I'm supposed to be at the twilight of my years, thinking, okay, I did all this good for the community, mentored kids, kept them out of trouble, that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, I got put out by the city of Virginia Beach. They tried to tell me that the widening of Witch Duck Road displaced my dental practice, and that I was supposed to move out and be treated just like the 3 other dentists that were also displaced. Well, long story short, I didn't get the same deal as the 3 other dentists. And so not only do we as Filipino Americans have to confront racism, in my opinion, we have to confront Americanism, in the fact that maybe we're not here long enough to, they thought I was one of these people that would just lay down and say, okay, sorry I caused so much problems, so forth and so on, and that, yes, I just came to America, so forth and so on,
But he called 10 on your side.
I said, see, the thing is that I would not be here in this very room if it wasn't for a community that cared. I mean, they advocated for busing, affirmative action, in order for me to become, the first Filipino American dentist. But then that's what I do. That's not really what I am. And what I am is a product of a community that's in dialogue, so forth and so on, because what happened to me would never happen in Seattle. But that's okay, because I am willing to fight, and that's what I did. I wound up fighting and beating the city of Virginia Beach in federal court and also in the state Supreme Court. So programs like this is excellent. So my hat's off to Vivian and Samantha, all the hard work. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And everybody here, I'm surprised this is, Thursday, to have an audience like this. And I'm just completely inspired, because now I realize, because of my lawsuit, that there's a little bit left in the tank for me to do. Okay, and I'm very privileged to sit up here with people that I've read about and admired, and I'm just grateful for being here. And I firmly believe we can make a difference. We can do better, and that it's a matter of patience, positive, create that positive environment, because there's people looking, there's people watching, especially that next generation, and that's all I have to say.
Well, people are definitely inspired by you as well. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I'm from Southwest Georgia, and I'm no stranger. I'm not a stranger to racism there. Most recently, we had a mayor who was locked out of his office, an African American mayor who was locked out of his own office. So that kind of puts it in perspective, the town that I grew up in. But being here in Hampton Roads, I think, did you guys just hear that? That was racism. Because the real racism, to your point, is so quiet that we never know it exists. When you don't get the job because they looked at your name on your resume, when you don't get the contract awarded to you because you're not friends with the person awarding the contract, that's the racism that we need to fight. And that's why we need to unmask it. So it's not, I'll give you a more practical example. When I first moved here, my cousins moved to Western Branch area of Chesapeake. And it had to be like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. These guys came by on a truck, and they had, this is kind of hard to believe for me to say, but if I didn't see it, they came by on a truck with a baseball bat, and they were knocking off people's mailboxes in the neighborhood. And they stopped outside of my cousin's house, and they said, "Come on out, you N-word." And these had to be like some teenagers or something like that. And they were just egging them on to come out. Of course, we called the cops, right? So that's what most people think of when they think of racism. But racism is really quiet, and the racism that you don't see is more dangerous than somebody calling you a name.
I hope I've got something intelligent to add, but one of the, Anita and I both being in the media, I think it's kind of our responsibility to help call out racism, either when we see it or when somebody, lets us know about it. And I think too many times maybe we try to equivocate or say, oh, well, it's not really. You guys were talking outside about, hopefully nobody will say, I don't, see color, because, and hopefully they don't, but I think I've been thinking about that. That's one of the things, like, on one of the shows I work on in the morning, you hear that a lot. And you've got to realize in the media when it is a buzzword and try to constructively unmask it when you see it and start the conversations so that hopefully, people can realize where they're thinking, that their thinking is wrong. I mean, from my point of view, I try to be not non-judgmental about it, and just kind of, let folks know, well, no, that kind of is wrong what you're saying. We got a lot of response this week. We did the story about Colin Kaepernick and how, he had the tryout, and of course, because he should have been in the league for 3 years, because he's, there are so many people that are, less qualified than him that have a high-paying job in the NFL now, simply because he chose, to speak up about something that he believed in. And I mean, some people think it's right, some people think it's wrong, but he was trying to start a conversation. And when people call in and try to say, well, yeah, what about this, that, and I try to gently explain to them, well, okay, no, see, if he's qualified, then it's really not right that they're keeping him out and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and when you go into the Colin Kaepernick, it's a multifaceted issue for sure. I'm not sure if we have time tonight to talk all the way through that. But it absolutely gets people talking for sure on the different levels and what we see. Go ahead, Dr. Bergano.
Before I forget, I would have to give props to WAVY T10, because I thought my case was just a little low-key thing, but then to see me on the news and people just, I was stopped in my, gym, is that you? Were you on TV? But thank you very much, Andy Fox. Wow, this guy is like, in person, he's really, really intense. These guys, I think we're very, very fortunate in this area to have WAVY 10 on your side, and that's a fact.
I didn't pay him to say that. I promise I didn't.
And you being here, so I wanted to make sure I get that on record. Thank you.
That's actually one thing that young journalists have to, I think, be cognizant of and keep, pushing their bosses, because a lot of times, we as journalists sometimes, we kind of get a little jaded. And we have to guard against that, because it's very easy to do just because of the things that you and I know that we both see every day when we're on the street. And the doctor's case is a good reminder of why what journalists do is so valuable, to the area.
Absolutely. I think I can't remember the exact figures, Dr. Bergano, that you quoted us for the offers that went to some of your colleagues. Do you want to?
No, that's okay.
Okay. All right. It was a major disparity, though. It was a major disparity, and it needed to be brought to light. So that is the power of the media. People can take media however you like, and there's some good and there's some bad, like everything else. But that is the power of the media in a positive way to bring about change. So what challenges, and this kind of goes back into Dr. Bergano, but we see it in so many different areas. So Randy, if you want to talk to it as well or speak to it, that's fine. What challenges do entrepreneurs and business professionals of color face in the region, and how can we begin to mitigate them? Furthermore, how can the region's business community become more reflective of the region's diversity?
I think the question has the answer. The business community is not reflective of the people in the region. So one of the things we have to do is create that equity that you were speaking about earlier. And I think something crossed my mind when the chief was speaking, is a very powerful word that we've become acquainted with that has freed so many people out of their situations, is transparency. We need transparency on the police force. That's the only way we can begin to trust them. And so we need transparency in our local government, in our state government, and national. We need to know who's getting the government contract. Who is this company, who runs it, how long, how much money are they getting? What percentage of people of color are awarded contracts? We shouldn't have to have an independent company go in just like the former NFL player did in Virginia Beach and do your own study just to prove something that we already know. So we need transparency in order for us to understand what the problems are, and then we can move forward. And then I would think it would look like some combination of both education and training, and then a component that allows us to be stipulated to take part in certain things that are being developed in the area. So a combination of those.
So going off of what Randy was just saying, the Supreme Court of the United States said in order to create programs to address disparities, you have to have what they call a disparity study to actually prove that this disparity exists. And what Bruce Smith was doing in Virginia Beach was pushing to have this disparity study done so that, one, we can get the analytics and the data, because this is what happens. When you try to create a program, when a city or an entity tries to create a program to address the disparity, it gets challenged in court. And then when it gets challenged in court, there's no proof that an actual disparity exists, so you have to create this disparity study. We have for a long time, the NAACP and other organizations have been trying to get disparity studies, a regional disparity study done. But you will not believe the resistance. Now, I'm going to say this real quick, and my Democratic friends are going to get mad at me, but I'm going to say it, that racism does not have a party affiliation. Okay, because you will not believe the number of Democrats, the people who claim themselves to be Democrats, who are fighting us from this disparity study so we can get to young brothers like Randy who can get to contracts and get to what I mentioned earlier about wealth. Another thing I think that we could do in this area is we have to really address the government contract issue, the SWAM issue, the MWBE programs, because we're not getting to the real minority within the minority. Black businesses are the real minority, and if you look at the data and the analytics, it is not being fully addressed, and there is continuing to be more marginalized as we're going forward. So I think hopefully we can get some, and that's the solution, is a disparity study. So go back to your members of city council and say, hey, do you have a disparity study on the books? It's not just a waste of money. It is to undergird and protect your programs to address the disparities in terms of the economic situation in your cities.
He said you would not believe, and I think all of us are like, oh no, I believe it. I believe it. Did you want to say?
And I want to add to that. Entrepreneurs feel somewhat disenfranchised because the playing field is not on the same level, and we have to build true partnership between government, labor, community, and private sector to build true wealth zones and support entrepreneurs to help them lower their financial risks across every segment of our communities by purchasing their products or services we use, and then give them back or feedback information on what we want. Like myself, as the director of the Suffolk African American Cultural Society, our objective is to collaborate and create alliances, to partner with others and find resources to assist those who are unemployed, underemployed, underserved, and that fall below the federal poverty guidelines. And so, even with where I live in my village, as an oyster woman, a 7th generation of oystermen who were totally self-sufficient and independent, living off of the river. You know, that's why I now see the responsibility for preserving and protecting irreplaceable historic resources rests ultimately with you and I and those who are interested.
Did you say 7th generation? Wow, that is amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah, my mom is 98 years old. Yeah.
Oh, she's here with us tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, stand up, Mom.
She's 98, so she can.
Is that Mom? With in the green?
Wave your hand.
Oh, right here. Hi, Mom. I said, oh, that's a good look. That's because she's not 98. Okay. Oh, wonderful. Hi, Mom. She looks beautiful. Let me recognize a few folks that we have who have joined us this evening. We have Portsmouth City Council member Mr. Shannon Glover. Thank you for joining us. And also Norfolk School Board member Mr. Carlos Clanton. Thank you for being here with us. We appreciate it. You know, it's always good to see our community leaders to come out, even if you're not on the panel, to be a part of the discussion. People need to see you, see your face, know that you're interested in the things that they're interested in as well. Let's continue on, and this will be our last question for this portion of the program. In what ways can Portsmouth, Chesapeake, and Suffolk become more aware and inclusive of the needs of all of their residents, including youth and more senior generations, minority groups, and economically disadvantaged citizens? Not all at once. James.
I think one of the ways that we can hopefully get to where we can recognize it is one to recognize it. I know it sounds kind of funny, but cities now, and not only regionally but in individual cities, there's so many things that are going on that are swept underneath the rug. And I always say this oftentimes, even the conversation around gun violence in our community and how we prevent it, everything cannot come from the government. Some things have to come from the community up. And the government has to understand that it has a role to play, but if we're going to really get to be authentic and real and get in our communities, it has to come from us. And government can undergird the community by reaching out, being a part, You know, having certain meetings, not during certain times of the day. Don't have your meetings at 7 a.m., have them at 6 p.m. so people can come out, engage people, go to the communities who traditionally are marginalized. And I say this too, even in our city, we have 2 city council persons here who I know understand this community, but I can tell you now, there's communities out there, even in the city of Portsmouth right now, in a community called London Oaks. There are people, there are kids that are digesting 12% bacteria. And if you don't understand what that is, we're talking about digesting bacteria. We had the leg conversation earlier. And then they, with those minds, they go to the public school system, and we know that the prison industrial complex is fueled by those who are not, and a lot of times, successful in school. And that comes back to the mentality of their mind when you're eating bacteria and you're eating lead. These are the kind of conversations we need to be real about. We need to acknowledge it's not to be embarrassed. And let me say to city leaders, don't be embarrassed. Be courageous. Always, you don't have to do what's politically safe to do. You can do what's morally courageous to do. And do what Dr. King said, redeem the soul of America. And we can do that, but we got to be honest. And so that conversation, hopefully, through conversations like this tonight, we can push government to do it, because I can tell you right now, it won't do it unless we make it do it.
Yes, and I totally agree with you on that. And as one of my mentors, who's now my ancestor, Mr. George Hatton, would often tell me, you have to blend in yesterday with today in order to prepare for tomorrow. So I feel that the citizens themselves can better articulate how they feel about actions that are taken against them, whether it's just or unjustly. And so with, you know, the communities such as Portsmouth, Chesapeake, and Suffolk, they can do the same as the police officers. They can have community meetings, you know, in churches, in rec centers, in restaurants, and, you know, bring themselves to the people so that they can meet them to know who they are that we're supposed to protect and serve them.
Love your answer, because it's something I was thinking. I was trying to monopolize everyone's time. But something that I know takes place, at least with the police chiefs, we meet regionally and we talk about problems, what have you. And of course, in the course of my duties, I'm always involved in something where there's some community that's disproportionately affected, whether it's they're looking, whatever it is. And we do a survey. We ask the people, what is it that you want? Because it's important, before we marshal all the resources to go into community and give them something, no, I prefer, tell us what it is that you want so that we can best address your need. And one of the things that always comes to the forefront is recreational activities for youth, job training, transportation, you know, 2 jobs, and so forth. And I'm thinking to myself, we're not the only community that's experiencing this. And should someone have to wait for a job fair that does not necessarily meet their time of day so they can get connected to the services that they need so that they can improve their lives? And I'm thinking there's got to be a better approach than us singularly doing it. Why can't we collectively do this, and why can't we take the show on the road to the people? And now again, that's not a law enforcement thing, but I'm thinking as a community, I'm thinking bigger than that. Because, and I throw that out there to people, just say, look, rethink the problem. Sometimes you have to go to the people and not let the people come to you. You know where these communities are, you know where the people are, and the fact is that the people want these things. I'm amazed. Actually, I'm encouraged, because I know people, when we think of communities, we say, oh, they don't want this, they don't want that, you know, this is what they need. No. Let them tell you what they want and what they need, and I guarantee you, you can help them get it. But it needs to be a collective effort that starts from the ground up. And I think you're right, government can and should be able to step in and help people along the way to get them to that area of self-sufficiency, whether they want to be their own business owner and so forth. Before I shut up, I want to ask a question of the audience and everybody here. Other than your hairdresser or your barber, how many of you all patronize minority-owned businesses? Very good, thank you. All right, something I just needed to know for my own self.
Bob said he doesn't need a barber. Oh, well, you all, we are doing really well on time right now, so we're going to take a short intermission. We'll come back in just a few more minutes, about maybe 10 minutes or so. We'll come back, reconvene, and we're going to continue the conversation with more questions, those that have been coming online and from many of you.
And really quickly, thank you so much, Anita, and to our panelists. Really quickly, we want to remind the audience, and ask the audience rather, you were given note cards when you first came in and when you registered. Please write down questions for our panelists. We will ask them in the second portion of the program after our intermission. So we want you to I'm sorry? You should have note cards like this. And if you don't, we have some staff in the back who are going to pass them out to you. When you've written your question down, please find our lovely Vice Mayor Lucasberg. She is going to be collecting those questions, and we're going to be processing them and giving them to our panelists, okay? And secondly, please, 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 if you're on social media tonight, we want to know your reaction to what our panelists have had to say so far. We want to know about your experience here at Unmasking Hampton Roads. Mark your tweets, Instagram posts, Facebook posts with hashtag UnmaskingHR. It will help us to improve the series in the future, okay? Thank you so much. 15 minutes, we'll see you again. Thanks.
Hopefully you met someone new in the room. You know, one of the other things we were talking about earlier when I was at over on the peninsula was just the power of connection. You know, the power of connection. Everywhere we go, there's another opportunity to connect with new people, and there's some power in that. To be able to meet new people, greet new people, and have them as a part of your network as well. So there's power in this room. There's a whole lot of people who haven't met each other. So hopefully you meet somebody new before you leave out of here this evening. So for this second portion, we're going to start right out the gate. We're going to go back to one thing that Bob mentioned during the first half, and that was a conversation we kind of had out in the vestibule before we came in today. And we were kind of talking about the last city that we were in, when we were in Virginia Beach. One of the panelists mentioned that, well, they didn't see color. Okay, I'm looking at this room. I see a whole lot of different colors. You know, I see a whole lot of different colors. So can you expound upon why the phrase, "I don't see color," can be offensive to people, especially of color? Anybody?
There was a movie, the movie 300. Have anybody seen that movie where the king goes and he could have done a whole lot of things, but his last order was to get one of the soldiers and say, "Go back," and his only order was, "Remember us." And what he was talking about was existence. When somebody says they don't see color, it's offensive because you're telling me you don't see my existence. And to not see someone's existence is probably the most evil and the most hateful thing that you can acknowledge to somebody, to wipe out someone's existence. And so when you see that, it's offensive, it's demoralizing, it's degrading when somebody says, "Hey, you know what? I have so much privilege, and I'm in my position that I don't even get to see. I don't see color. I don't see racism. That is when you hear that, you immediately know. You know what? This person is choosing to be willfully ignorant. And Dr. King talked about willful ignorance. And that is extremely offensive, and it's probably one of the most offensive things that you could say to anyone, is that I don't acknowledge your existence.
One thing that I think immediately hit me, when we have events like this, and I'm looking around the room, like, diversity is a beautiful thing. You know, whether it's from the inside or the outside, diversity is a beautiful thing. We're not a monolithic society. So I like the fact that when we come into scenarios like this, when we come into, you know, for a conversation about, I don't want to just talk to black people about race. You know, I don't want to just talk to black people in my neighborhood about race. Like, I want to see white people, black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, Native Americans. I want to see people who live in my neighborhood, people who live on the opposite side of town. You know, I think that's one of the reasons why they've been moving this around as well. Because you don't just want to have that conversation with people in Virginia Beach. You don't just want to have that conversation with people in Hampton. You don't just want to have it with people in Portsmouth. You want to have a mix of different perspectives, a mix of different backgrounds. Not even all black people see things the same way. Not all white people see things the same way. So it's good to come into a room where it's truly diverse and acknowledge the diversity. Yes, I see your color, and it's a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful thing.
I think I don't see color as problematic for two reasons. Number one, I think ultimately it just comes off as insincere. It puts up a wall between you and the other person. They don't believe it. How can you walk around and exist in America, especially during this climate, and not see color? So I hope what they're trying to say is that they don't discriminate on people, they don't treat people differently based on their race. And the second thing is, it's problematic because it speaks to a bigger underlying issue, and one that we're fighting with, and that is acting like something doesn't exist. So for example, as long as I say I have this one black friend, I don't have to really talk about any of the problems that racism creates, right? So as long as there is this one black person in my department at my job, I can say we have a diverse staff. So acting like the problem doesn't exist is one of the major problems.
Okay, so here's the next question. It's still speaking to what we were just talking about, but just delves into it a little bit more. I'm saying this on behalf of the person. You'll know quite obviously why I'm saying that. I am white. Clearly. So I am white, privileged person. I want to do something to help. Where do I start and how?
Well, I think it's beautiful how you just started. I'm white and I'm privileged. And the acknowledgement is key. So whoever said that, I want to applaud you. Because you can do more for this nation than I think you may actually know. Let me give you a real quick example. And this is an awkward, uncomfortable topic, but I'm going to mention it. We saw recently in Virginia where the governor did the blackface situation, okay? And I said to him, and I don't mind making it public because it's a conversation that we all can heal from. I said, you have the most important opportunity now more than anybody has ever had. You can say right now, in this moment, that racism exists. And when I was younger, I did things that I should not have done. Because of my background and how I grew up, it's wrong. And I want to encourage every white elected official to come out with your blackface moment. And let us now in this country, let's deal with it, let's address it. But because the politics got hot, it didn't get addressed, it got swept under the rug. So we have, whoever did it, thank you for your courage, because it starts right there. I'm a white American, I'm a white brother and sister, and I have privilege. To acknowledge it is key. What you can do is in your sphere of influence, you can speak to it. You can go back to white friends that you have and say, hey, listen, you have privilege, we have privilege. Let's go to council and let's tell them, hey, we have privilege, we need to address these disparities. We need to do the disparity study. We need to go into communities. We need to have conversations with people who we might not traditionally go to. So you have a great sphere of influence that you can do right now, but the first step is acknowledging it. So thank you for your courage.
Yes, thank you for your courage. And for that white person and wanting to ask what is it that he or she can do, I'd be glad to see you after this series.
Anyone else want to chime in? Okay. All right. Has the NAACP seen Portsmouth's poverty study? If so, what is the organization's assessment of it, and how will the results of the study benefit African American communities?
We have seen the poverty study, and we have been reviewing it and still digesting it to see the analytics and the data. I hope from the conversation that we're going to have resources come back to people and communities who are suffering most. I think like what most disparities of most studies will tell you is that one, there is the presence of suffrage in the city. We know that. There is high poverty in the city. We know that. But one of the interesting things about the study is, and what we tried to address with council and tried to address with the individuals who did the study, was how are we going to define poverty? How are we defining poverty? It's not just the individuals that are homeless. There are people who have jobs that are still impoverished. And so we have to look at that, and is that going to address those individuals? And we're hoping that from that, we're going to have a surplus of resources go to people who traditionally won't get access to it. Because again, being real, when you have a toll in the city, two of the cities that have the highest black populations in Hampton Roads, there is a situation where people now are in poverty because they have to pay the toll. So we did the study look and analyze it. So honestly, we're trying to still analyze the scope of it. But the hope we have is that we're going to get a splurge of resources. It's TBD, to be quite honest, because it's going to depend on what city council does to address it.
What steps should we, as individuals of color, do to help our peers be authentic and honest about our experiences? I think coming to events like this is a part of it. You know, to have that, again, that dialogue in mixed company. It gets real uncomfortable when you have some of these conversations in mixed company. You know, sometimes you feel like in your sphere of influence, your community, that you know, you can say certain things and then you get over, oh, well, now we have to code switch. No, you know, have that conversation in mixed company. And I think that's a part of it. Anyone want to address it?
You have to have conversations like this in mixed company, because if you don't, then we're all just sitting here basically talking to ourselves. Nothing would ever get solved if we didn't talk about this in mixed company.
Okay, based on a definition given tonight, says that I don't agree with. If I have wealth, power, and influence, am I labeled a racist? So what am I supposed to do? Give my wealth away? What's your solution to this?
Wealth, power, and resources, right? So I'm not saying that you give away your wealth. I'm not saying that you give away your individual power. What I am saying is that you acknowledge that because of the color of your skin, you have a disproportionate ability to gain and to get wealth, power, and resources that other individuals do not have. So I'm not asking you to give up anything, but I am asking you to acknowledge that those three things exist. Because of the color of your skin, you have a position that I might not have as a black man in America. and then you can do something about it. You can. We're talking about now the candidates on the Democratic side are talking about free college tuition. There's things talking about housing disparity. You can call your congressman, you can call your delegate, you can call your senator and say, hey, listen, we have to have more opportunities for people like me. We got to have opportunities for other people who don't look like me, and you can do that. So don't think it's an affront because the definition of it, and be courageous. Hey, yes, the definition of racism are these three tenets, and yes, I've had it. Because you are in a position where, in that definition of racism, it doesn't mean that you're an evil person. It doesn't mean that you're a bigot. It doesn't mean that you're prejudiced. But it does mean that in your position in America, that you are in a position that I might not ever be able to be in. So we got to be real with that, and it's okay to. So don't think of it as an affront. Think of it as an internal reflection. And then to be able to say, okay, how can I, from my position, do something for somebody else that might not ever be in that position?
Everyone knows the saying, to whom much is given, much is required. And for each of us, we are here and put on this earth to serve one another. We are all here placed with different gifts and different talents. And it's really up to us to help each one of us to develop that gift and that talent. So what is it that you can do to serve? I mean, that's what we're here. We're nothing but servants. So when we don't serve, then we cut off our own blessings to not only just us, but to our future generations, because it's going to continue to be a cycle. So we have to, say it has to end somewhere.
To the question was asked, what do I do in white privilege, what have you? There's this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. I use it as my part of my signature on my emails. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in times of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. For those persons who have, as Mr. Boyd stated, wealth, influence, resources, there is going to be times where there are things that come up that are controversial. I think you have an obligation to speak out, and you have the ability to use your influence to change the outcome. Remaining silent is not necessarily an option. And I'll give you an example, and I think Mary's, she talked about something that we know that has taken place across this country. It's called environmental racism, where people decide where coal plants have gone, or where waste, or what do you call those things, the trash dumps and so forth, where they go. At some point in time, some people, like in my former neighborhood near Prince Park, there's a nickel contamination. And people knew that these things were wrong, they were bad, but they don't affect nobody, the people that I know, so I'm not going to say anything. Well, I think that if you know this, you have a moral obligation to use your wealth, power, and influence to say, that's not right, we're not going to have this forced upon that community.
Very good point made. So I think in what I'm hearing in the answers, just to kind of summarize, I think it's saying that the wealth, power, and influence doesn't necessarily make you a racist. It's what you do with it. It's what you do with it, because you can use the wealth, power, and influence for mighty things to help people who look like you and people who don't look like you. Or you can decide to use it for other intentions. So this is a question from one of Bob's listeners on WTAR. And we just kind of touched on it, but we can just delve into it a little bit more here. When you hear people in your circles making biased comments, do you speak up? Why or why not?
Probably human nature being what it is, honestly, not as much as we probably need to. And that's for a lot of reasons, one of which sometimes is self-preservation. Because especially in my business, our two big prime directives are keep the license, make money. And so, but what I try to do when you see instances of bias, the good thing about it being the fact that I work at a sports talk radio station, fortunately it is not life and death, but it is kind of a metaphor and a window into larger society. So I like to look at it as a good way, again, to call out bias when you see it, because it usually isn't something like literally like life and death, like Colin Kaepernick, or the story we talked about today about the player for the Cleveland
Mason
Browns,
Rudolph and
Mason Rudolph and
Garrett,
Myles Garrett,
yeah.
right? And believe me, colored me shocked just looking at that situation. Was not surprised and totally, believe Myles Garrett on that. But it's a way because people would invariably call in and say, oh well, no, that's not what happened and this and that, and so I try to, respectfully, but somewhat firmly say, well, now see what you're saying actually is, whatever, bias or whatever it is. And do I do a perfect job of it? Absolutely not. But I'm trying, I try to do it the best I can.
No one's going to be perfect at it, but I do think that's
You are usually perfect at it.
No.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to chime in? How do you call it out? How do you confront it? Do you speak up?
It's interesting with the situation with the NFL with Myles Garrett, where the situation happened. All three black athletes were suspended, but the one white athlete still remains. No disciplinary action has gone to it. And some might say, oh, well, it's just cool. No, these are what they call the embers of the fire, right? These little things that happen. We just assume, oh, well, it's okay. It's just the NFL. Same thing that happened with Colin Kaepernick. He's not a good of a football player. Well, I don't know if you guys saw it, but he was throwing the ball, I think, better than a lot of quarterbacks out there, and then some of the Hall of Fame quarterbacks out.
Well, see, that's what everybody says, but if you look at his statistics, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on it, but no, you're absolutely right. Even his last year in the league, when he was on this really bad team, he threw, for those of you who don't follow football, I'm sure there are a few out there, okay, touchdowns good, interceptions bad, right? Team that won like 2 or 3 games that year, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That's a pretty good ratio, especially on a bad team like that. And the Myles Garrett situation with Mason Rudolph, you're right. It's like, because there's, he hit him with the helmet. Well, yeah. And then I'd say, well, yeah, but Mason Rudolph kind of grabbed his face mask first and did charge at him. So I'm not saying 2 wrongs make a right. I'm just saying what's going to happen, though, is you watch, he'll be suspended for the rest of the year, Myles Garrett. In the off season, they're very quietly going to reinstate him for week 1. I guarantee it.
Violence always defaults to black men. And that's because of the caricature of how the media portrays black men as violent, as aggressive. And so oftentimes what happens is when you see it, the first instinct, aggressive, black, angry man. And so they attribute it. And so that's a part of the play too. And I think what we should discuss as well is how are black men portrayed in the media, how are black people portrayed, and oftentimes it's aggressive. So
even when, I think sometimes when it's even unintentionally sometimes, like when people are trying to pay a compliment or whatever, but perfect example, Marshawn Lynch. Remember what his nickname was? Beast Mode. And I never thought of it that way before, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's what it is.
When I watched the Cleveland Browns game against the Steelers, I immediately thought, okay, every player involved in this is getting some type of discipline. I did. I immediately thought, you've got a face mask pull here, you have running after this, you have the helmet hit, you have the kicking on the ground, you have this one, threw this one down. It was there were multiple issues there. So I immediately thought, everybody, just
Yeah.
everybody involved. Give them
Yep.
something, whether it's a fine, suspension, and I would agree with Miles Garrett getting the most severe because of the helmet hit.
Yeah.
Because, obviously the helmet's gonna be a little bit worse than me kicking you on the ground.
Right.
So I would agree with them getting maybe the most severe penalty, but it was concerning that this push, this helmet hit, this kick, discipline down but there was something that preceded that.
Anita, I have to agree with you, and I look at it from the law enforcement lens. We roll up, that's a fight, everybody goes to jail.
And for anybody wondering why nobody did go to jail, it's because the law basically says if you step on an athletic field where there's contact, you're pretty much giving your consent to.
Yeah. Well, there were some memes online that had the hockey players sitting saying, that was pathetic. Nothing like what we do. We lose teeth, yeah. Okay, so we don't have any more questions that have been passed up here. We have, if you like, one more question here. Okay, all right. It's going to be our last question, and then we're going to wrap things up. Please discuss institutional racism and how to combat its effects.
Jeff wrote the question, and he and I had a brief conversation. It has been talked about in this country for at least the last decade, maybe even longer, about criminal justice reform. And I can tell you many of my colleagues in law enforcement, they believe in criminal justice reform, but it's not just us, it's the whole system. That's the courts, the corrections, probation, parole. This country really needs to take a look at the criminal justice system, how it is disproportionately affects minorities, and what's considered to be legal and frowned upon. To that end, I know that the Crime Commission has talked about it here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I know that, again, there's been, even at the national level, dating back to the guy who was senator before Warner was, can't think of the guy's name, Jim something or another. Jim Webb, thank you. Talked about that. And it always seems to take the back burner and never really takes traction. But I think that we as Americans, we as Virginians need to get the people who make the laws and so forth to actually just undertake this and do it. It can be done. It does not take a great deal of effort, but it is something that it is right to do.
I think what we're finding in 2019 and forward is that to combat institutional racism, it's going to have, the message is going to have to come from the people. So us here, we're going to have to put the pressure on our elected officials for them to do something, because otherwise the good old boys club is going to continue to go forward like it's been going. It's a well-oiled machine. It doesn't need anything, it doesn't need any change. So you guys are talking about football. What would happen if one of the owners did a press conference with Colin Kaepernick and said, we're going to give him a job?
Yeah.
He did not regard any other comment from his fellow owners or that brotherhood. He looked them right in the face and said, it's not right what we're doing to this man, and I'm going to give him a job. Even if he never plays it down, I'm going to make a statement by hiring him. Those are the types of statements that white people in this country have to make. So to your question that you asked a little while ago, white people have to decide what side of history they want to be on. So if you have wealth, power, influence, you have to decide what you're going to do with that. What side of history do you want to be on, and what do you want people to say about you after you're gone? What do you want your impact?
All right, well, we thank you all so much for the questions. This was a good discussion, don't you think? Yeah, good discussion. I'm going to pass the mic back to Samantha, and we'll close things up. Phew. Okay, we've definitely been unmasked tonight. We've definitely had some very in-depth conversations. I want to first start by thanking our audience, thanking our attendees. Each of you who've come out tonight, you're taking an active
role in making your community a more equitable, a more a place where everyone feels comfortable sharing their perspective and dialoguing about how it really is for many of us. So thank you for taking this step to be here tonight. We want to extend a special thank you to our panelists. We are so grateful that you all. We are so grateful that you all have given us your time and your thoughts. I want to give a special thanks to Bob, because we did indeed ask him at the last moment. As you saw advertised, we had another panelist that was supposed to be with us tonight, and she could not make it, but Bob stepped right in.
Sorry.
This is
Partial refunds are available.
This is what jumping into the conversation looks like, and a part of having courageous conversations. So thank you. Thanks to all our panelists. Another huge thank you to Anita Blanton, who we can't say enough about the gravity, the grace that you brought to this series. We really appreciate your presence here and every perspective that you've shared with us. Thank you so much, and thank you also to WAVY TV 10, which is our exclusive television partner. I am just overwhelmed and happy. I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to Vivian.
I'm overwhelmed and happy too. So I have some more thank yous. I want to thank Dr. Michelle Woodhouse. She is the provost of the Portsmouth campus of Tidewater Community College for hosting us. Her team, they've been awesome. So I want to thank them for just allowing us to be here tonight. I want to thank Samantha mentioned at the beginning that this work is led by, this entire project is called Beneath the Surface, Race and the History of Race in Hampton Roads. And so in addition to Samantha, myself, we had an advisory committee of 24 members who really helped this work. So we had any advisory members here tonight. Would you please stand so we can recognize you? And I would add Dr. Michelle Woodhouse is also an advisory member as well. Samantha mentioned our exclusive television partner, WAVY TV 10, but we had some other partners as well. We had our exclusive workshop partner, Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, who will be here on Saturday to help with the workshop. Here, the same location from 10 to 12, so I hope you can come out for that. We also have some additional community partners, bear with me. African American Cultural Center of Virginia Beach, Council of United Filipino Organizations of Tidewater, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Coastal Virginia, Juneteenth Festival Company, Junior League of Norfolk Virginia Beach, Teens with a Purpose, Thrive Young Professionals, the Urban League of Hampton Roads, WHRO Media, and YWCA of Southampton Roads. Let's thank our community partners. I also want to thank Bob Matthews Station, WTAR, and WNIS for helping to promote Unmasking Hampton Roads. I want to thank my colleagues at the Hampton Roads Community Foundation. They have been awesome through this journey, and so I want to thank them and the partnership with Virginia Humanities. Justin Reed is here with Virginia Humanities, so I just wanted to recognize him as well. Mitchell, who is doing live streaming for us, so thank you both. And also, we just want to say to you again, please don't forget to share your experiences, hashtag UnmaskingHR, and thank you all for coming out tonight. Hope to see you on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Have a good evening.